With Logan Paul now set to take on his second Shield member at the 1-year anniversary of his in-ring debut at the show of shows, WrestleMania, there have been a lot of people within the past year who have been praising him for how good he really is. Although, I haven't been one of them. Why not? How could this possibly be? Which I'm sure some of you out there are wondering. Well, in order to answer that, I think it's best to see how Mr. Logan Paul stacks up against another celebrity wrestler. And all that is the topic of this episode. Because today... Thank you to all the wonderful supporters out there who support me over on Patreon, like True Sinister and The Reflection of Perfection. To find out how to get your own Patreon shoutout, please go over and check out my Patreon page. I pity the fool that doesn't subscribe to Dave Knows Wrestling and who doesn't leave a like. Now, on with the episode. Alright, before we begin, allow me to remind everyone that what is considered good is of course subjective, and everybody is entitled to like whatever it is that they like. But if you're an old head wrestling fan like me and you share the same sensibilities, then you're probably going to view Logan Paul in much of the same way that I do. Because by our criteria, he really doesn't fit all of the standards that we look for in order to consider someone to be a good wrestler. But now, this is not to say that he's bad or that he doesn't do anything right, because it's not 100% one way or the other. And yes, it should go without saying that Logan Paul is very athletic and he does execute a lot of moves very, very well. But now, having said that, why exactly haven't I given him the mark of approval? Well, again, if you watch professional wrestling the way that I do and you're looking for certain things, then you'll know that there is a lot out there outside of just doing moves. Because it really all comes down to psychology and storytelling. And so, in order to better demonstrate what I'm talking about exactly, I think it's best to compare Logan Paul against another celebrity wrestler who was in a very similar situation. I'm talking about Mr. T. You know, it is kind of strange when we look back on it to realize that the very first WrestleMania main event ever was a tag team match, and one that had a celebrity in it. That's right, back in 1985 at WrestleMania 1, Hulk Hogan and Mr. T teamed up to take on Roddy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. This was the main event that launched the entire franchise of what WrestleMania would become. And it's even funnier when you remember that Hulk Hogan and Mr. T were both the bad guys in Rocky 3. Anyway, now that that's been established, we're going to take a look at that match at WrestleMania 1 and we're going to see how it stacks up against Logan Paul's first match at WrestleMania 38, where he teamed up with The Miz to take on Dominic and Rey Mysterio. Back when Dominic and Rey were on good terms with each other. Okay, so right off the bat, I think you can see how much this makes sense. Both of these celebrities are teamed up with a showman wrestler as their tag team partner, and they're going against a seasoned veteran, and okay, I will give you that Mr. T does have the advantage since he's also going against Paul Orndorff, where Logan Paul had to take on the relatively new rookie of Dominic Mysterio. But as you're about to see, it really doesn't make that much of a difference, especially from how I'm about to look at it, which I'm going to show you. But I do have to remind you, I really can't show as much of the footage as I would like because of, you know, copyright and all that, so this is the best we got. Although I should say that this should highly encourage you to re-watch both of these matches back to back to see what subtle notes you can pick up on. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to examine here is when it comes to professional wrestling moves. And yes, I did say Logan Paul was excellent at doing a lot of them, but there's more to doing moves than just doing moves. Because sure, he does do an amazing buckshot lariat, some would say even better than Adam Page. But if you're a longtime fan of this channel, then you know I am quite the fan of chain wrestling, stringing multiple moves together all in one sequence. And in this particular case, I have to say both Logan Paul and Mr. T, well, really aren't anything special. But I don't think they're supposed to be. Because if some rando off the street can just wrestle like Bret Hart, well then that's something of a problem because it takes the special away from the real pros. Although I'm not saying that anybody off the street could wrestle like Bret Hart. They wish. And so, when it comes to chain wrestling and celebrities, the barrier to entry is a lot lower. And both of them pass the test as they don't really string together more than 2 or 3 moves for the most part. And in some cases, like with celebrities or even a lot of big men wrestlers, this is totally fine. Although this does mean that I'm going to be more critical about the little bits of chain wrestling that I do see. And so now, let's just take a look at the most complex series of move exchanges that happened in both of these matches for both celebrities. Here we have Mr. T and Roddy Piper. It starts with Roddy Piper going into a standing switch, getting T into a waistlock, and then taking him down. And if you watch this sequence in its entirety, you'll see that Mr. T tries on several occasions to sit out and get out of the hold, which is exactly what you would see in real amateur wrestling, as this looks like an actual struggle. This right here looks like two men who are really jockeying for position, like they're really grappling, which is what, wrestling should look like in my opinion. And wouldn't you know, when we take a look at Logan Paul's first match, he has a sequence that's very similar, as Rey Mysterio gets him around the back, and he just picks him up and shoots him off. Okay, now I am aware that this isn't exactly a straight one-to-one parallel, as Rey Mysterio does have a significant size difference with Roddy Piper. But Logan and Mr. T aren't exactly the same size either, with Logan Paul having the height advantage and Mr. T having the muscle mass advantage. But even with that, T still makes this look like a struggle. He's willing to be vulnerable and to make it look convincing. But with the Logan Paul-Rey Mysterio exchange, it doesn't even look like Logan Paul was trying to get out of this. It just looked like it was rehearsed to be as such. And yes, that is what's going on, but it shouldn't look that way. I'm never going to believe that this performance is genuine if you're not even going to act the part. But speaking of acting, let's go to the next thing. Alright, so now when it comes to acting, a lot of people who have studied it will tell you that the biggest part of acting is actually reacting, because that is what sells the experience. And so now, let's take a look at how both men sell the act of being in a wrestling match. Here we have Mr. T, who was put into a front face lock. Again, another amateur wrestling move, and one that's really not all that devastating. After making a hot tag 20 seconds later, Mr. T is still hugging the apron down on the mat. And about a minute after first being put in the hold, he is back on his feet, but he's still selling the maneuver. And from here, the match doesn't last too much longer as it moves into the finish. A finish which, by the way, Hulk Hogan wins without the leg drop. I know, WrestleMania main event that ends without a finisher. Weird, right? Anyway, even after the match is over, Mr. T is still selling. It's hard for him to keep his head up and he's still taking deep breaths. Now that is commitment to a role. And so now let's take a look at what Logan Paul does to sell a match, as here he is kicked off the apron to the outside by Dominic Mysterio, which is a much bigger bump than simply being put into a front face lock. So let's see where Logan Paul is 20 seconds after this happens. He's back on his feet and adjusting his pants like nothing ever happened. And the reason why I'm using 20 seconds specifically is because this is when he was shown next. For all I know, he stopped selling after 5 seconds. And while Mr. T continued to sell even after the match was over, Logan Paul, well, at least he found his headband. Now, of course, some of you out there might be quick to point out that there is another significant difference between both of these celebrities, as Mr. T has the advantage of playing a babyface, while Logan Paul, on the other hand, is a heel. And heels naturally sell less than babyfaces do because they're supposed to be the underdog that gets the audience's sympathy and gets the audience to root for them. And that is true. However, for that, we are going to jump out of these two matches for just a little bit, as we're going to take a look at what it's like when Logan Paul is a babyface, as he was for his match with Roman Reigns. And you'll see he does sell more, like this Uranagi, which was sold for a minute, although there were still some other moves that didn't get anywhere near as much love. Now fine, this is a one-on-one match and not a tag team match, so you could make the argument that there is less breathing room, but again, if you're like me, that's no excuse, as a lot of one-on-one bouts, wrestlers sell for a good long time, and that's what we prefer. But now, going back to the idea that heels don't sell, that's not entirely true. Again, it's not all one way or the other. Heels do sell, and if you saw my episode about the formula of a professional wrestling match, you know that one of the first things that happens is that a heel gets out-wrestled. This doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be writhing in pain the entire time from every punch that you receive, but it should mean that the moves would register, that there should be a reason why things are happening, there should be a cause and effect. And representing that you know you've been out-wrestled and you need to come up with something desperate in order to get the advantage, well, that is a part of selling, as it is also a part of storytelling and psychology. But of course, that brings us to the next phase of criticism. Alright, Alright, so again, talking about something else that I've talked about in previous episodes, the will to win, storytelling, psychology. It's all a major part of the equation. Here we have Mr. T showing that he really wants to get tagged in, that he wants a piece of Roddy Piper. Now of course, he's playing his gestures big in the stage performance kind of way, making sure that everybody in the cheap seats can see it, as Mr. T's body language tells you what he wants. He wants to win, he wants to fight Roddy Piper, and we know this just by looking at him. He doesn't have to tell us. But in this case, I will say that Logan Paul also does a good job too, especially for this WrestleMania match, as he does play into the crowd's natural hatred of him. Oh, and in case you were thinking that the reason I'm so critical of Logan Paul is just because I hate him from all of his YouTube stuff, well, I'm going to tell you right now, I didn't really know who Logan Paul was before he got into wrestling. Yeah, I'm that out of touch. But outside of goading the crowd, he really doesn't do a lot in the way of storytelling. I'm not sure of what Logan Paul's motivations are for this match. Does he hate Rey Mysterio? Is he just trying to wrestle him? What is the plot here outside of anything they set up previously in promos or what might work? What is going on just by physical body language alone in the ring? And sure, there's some people out there who feel that the classic WWF style is a bit parochial and a little obvious and made for children, which sure it is, but I personally prefer that, and I think it's better than trying to make up the story myself. I'm watching the show, you give me the story, I'm not going to come up with it for you. I want to be able to tell what's going on plain as day, without any commentary, without any backstory. I want to see it and know it right off the bat, and I want it to be obvious. And if you're about to tell me that the story here is that he doesn't have to sell because he just wants to win that badly and give me some fighting spirit nonsense, and that's not what fighting spirit is, and you should know better. And just saying that someone wants to win and therefore that's why moves don't bother him is a total crock. Okay, so now that everything's said and done, and we've taken a look at Mr. T's first match as well as Logan Paul's, and we also have to consider some of the stories of how difficult Mr. T might have been to work with, and we also get to keep in mind that Logan Paul in the future might be able to learn some of these things, we still have to boil things down to brass tacks. And when we look at the overall picture of ring psychology, the will to win, and realism, we see that Logan Paul just comes up short against Mr. T. And when you look at things from the standards that wrestling fans like me have, well, it's no contest. Mr. T is by far superior. Well, there you go. Why Logan Paul really isn't that good, at least not yet, and why Mr. T is just so awesome. Let me know down in the comments what you think, and please make sure that you're subscribed and that you leave a like for this video. Thanks again for watching, and as always, Dave knows.